Okay, there we go. And you can see it's a little bit more complex. It's got more than one flow, and everything's there together. And let's just carry on where we just were. And if I go down to turn off all, you can see it turns off everything. We can go to turn on all, and that will turn on everything. So you can see that's quite useful. If we have just individual elements selected, we can say, here we go, turn off selected, and it'll turn off those elements. You can see we had those events selected there, so they get turned off. And we'll just use the same thing again to turn those back on. Turn on selected. And now if I just select individual operators within the various events and use the same things, you can see I can just turn off just those operators, or I can turn those back on again using those options. So you can see there's quite a bit of flexibility there in the way you can turn things on and off. Now at the moment we don't have any instance operators in our flow, so I'll just create one by doing this. I'll get rid of this rotation operator, hold down shift, drag this across and choose instance. And now we have two operators, and you can see they're instances of each other. This is where the next option comes into action. You can make it unique. Choose that, and you can see it makes this particular operator unique. If we had more than two instances of the operator, we could do that for each one of the instances until we only had two left. And by making one of those unique, you end up with no instances anymore. So there we are there. And we also have the option to wire selected, but we can already do that through dragging. So generally, you don't really want to do that. It's much easier to drag wires from here to here in the viewport. But basically all it does is, if I just demonstrate this, if we select on collision here and select this and we say wire selected, you can see it wires the two elements together. I'll do the same thing for this age test here, select this event, edit, wire selected. But as I said, it's generally easier to just do it by hand, just drag it like that, and you can do it that way. The only point at which it really comes into its own is when you may have multiple tests selected, at which point you can wire them all together in one go very quickly. So that's what that particular feature is useful for. Okay, let's wire these back together. Then you have the option to copy, paste, and paste instance. Those are exactly the same as the right menu options, so there's not really much point in going through those. Then you also have delete and rename, and you can see you've got the option to delete and rename in the right menu button, so you don't really need to know about those. Exactly the same feature. We'll just wire this back up again. Okay, so let's move on to the next menu, which is select, and you can see we have the select tool active at the moment, and you can choose to select all. That will select everything in the event view. You can see you can choose select none, which is obviously the opposite of select all. There we go. You can choose to select all of the actions. There you go, so selected all the actions, which includes both operators and tests. We'll just deselect those. You can choose just operators. You can select just tests. You can select just the sources. You can see we have two sources, and it'll just select those. You can see it will just select only events. So there you go, only the events in the view are selected. And you can also select downstreams. Now this is something which is peculiar to particle flow. Obviously, because it's based on a flowchart system, you have this concept of flow. Particles start off being birthed, and then they flow into this event. And then some particles will flow into this event. These events are downstream of this particular source. So if we select this source and we select downstreams, you can see it selects all the events which are downstream of that particular source. And if we do the same here and select downstream, it'll do the same thing. So in that way you can just select the events that are particularly affected and are wired to by that particular source. So that's quite a useful feature. Now the next feature is used for when you want to save out just individual elements of your particle flow, and that is save selected. If you choose that option, particle flow will allow you to save out just these elements to a max file, and what also will be saved is any elements that those are connected to in some way. As an example, collision tests use collision space warps. So when you save out selected, it'll save out the events and the operators, and it'll also save at that space warp because it's used within that particle flow. So effectively it becomes a selected object and it gets saved out. The next three options in this menu, they all basically allow you to synchronize selections that you have in particle view with selections that you have in the viewport. So as an example, if we select this icon here and we go to particle view, you can see we've got the option to get selection from viewport, and you can see that it's saying that this particular source icon is selected in the viewport. And now we could then combine that with select downstreams, and now we have all the events associated with this particular icon. So these particular features are useful for when you want to, as I said, synchronize your selections in your viewports and your particle view. Okay, let's move on to the next option, which is display. Now these tools are mirrored down here, as I said, so most of these are actually replicated, so I won't go through those in any great detail. You've got the pan tool here, you've got the zoom tool, the region zoom, zoom extents and no zoom. Exactly the same as the display tools down here. Now also you have the option to toggle the display of certain elements, which is something I've just showed you as well. You know, you can turn off the parameter panel, you can turn off the depot, and you know, obviously if you've got the parameter panel turned off, you have to have the description panel turned off. But you know, you can have the parameter panel turned on and you can have the description panel turned off. So it's up to you really if you want to have those elements displayed. And as I said, you know, when you have for instance the depot toggled off, you can still actually build your flow by using the options in the new menu and inserting and appending, and also by using the rightmost button and inserting and appending via those options. Some people actually prefer to work that way, so it's up to you whether you want to do that. And that's it for the display menu. So okay, let's move on to the options menu, and this is actually probably the most complex of the four, and I'm going to go into quite a bit of depth in here, but it's worth bearing good attention on this, because you know, some of these options are very key to the way particle flow actually operates. The first option is default display, and this is something that I demonstrated earlier. The default for when you create a new flow is to have a display operator which is local to each event. But you can also choose for it to be global, so let's just quickly demonstrate that. I'll create a standard flow and it puts it here, and you can see that instead of putting the display operator at the end of this event, it's actually put it into the global event. And now if I actually create new operators and drop them, you can see it creates new events, but it doesn't actually put a display operator into them. So you know, this could be the way that you prefer to work, but as I said, generally it's a good idea to have individual display operators for each event, because that allows you to show the particles in each event individually. You know, you could have particles in one event red, in another green, and you can have different shapes, and it basically allows you to diagnose exactly what your flow is doing a little bit more clearly. So that's something to bear in mind if you want to try using global display. So I'll just get rid of those and we'll turn it back to local display. Now the next option is action order, and this is quite a difficult concept to grasp, so bear with me on this one. These source events are called global events, and that means that any operators that you have in them are applied as overrides to all the other events that come after it. Now the way it's applied as an override is the order in which the operators within it are applied to the other events. You can actually have multiple render operators in other events, but the standard way they are evaluated is that the operators in the events are evaluated first, and last it evaluates the operators which are in the global event. This is how it overrides, because basically whatever values are set up here, if there's a global version of that operator, that overrides those values because it's evaluated last. And if you go to the action order, you can see that the action order is set up to evaluate locals first, and these are the local operators, and these are the global operators. So these get evaluated first, and then these get evaluated last, and that's how they override. The other option is to evaluate the globals first, and in that case it will actually apply these global operators first, and then the local operators are applied last, and in that way they can actually override the global operators. So depending on the circumstance, you can actually have very